Welcome to the podcast for Westside, a Jesus Church. We hope this teaching encourages and empowers you to love, learn, and live the way of Jesus.
So Psalm 23 is ground zero for a picture of living life in the presence of God. And life in the presence of God has a certain feeling to it. It has a certain vibe to it. Like life in the presence of God looks like living without fear. It looks like living, trusting God's plan for your life. It looks like gratitude. Next week, Dom is going to get into a theology of gratitude that we can live in. It looks like living as an unanxious presence in a world of chaos all around us. But right here in these beginning lines, we see that this concept of rest and life in the presence of God are inseparable realities. They're one in the same thing. Look at the first couple lines here. It says, "He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters." But if you weren't aware of this already, Americans are terrible at resting. To get more specific, I think Portlanders are terrible at resting. Think about it. There's always another meeting to be at. There's always another spin class to register for. There's always another deadline to meet, another soccer game to get our little people to, another day of fighting traffic on 26 or 217. We are really good at working, at earning, at achieving, at accumulating more. But if we're honest with ourselves, terrible at truly resting. And if you look at statistics, Americans work, on average, if you work full time, 47 hours a week, which is 1 hour less than a 6-day work week. If you look at Americans compared to other countries, Americans work on average 137 hours more than the average worker in Japan, 260 hours more than the average worker in the UK, and get this, 499 hours more per year than the average worker in France. Okay, almost 500 hours more per year. I can see some of you like booking flights to Paris right now. I'm with you. Let's all go be French. But a lot of this overworking, I think, is due, ironically, to the implementation of labor-saving devices. That the iPhone is changing the way that we work here in our country in 2018. Now, the office used to be a place where you would go to work, right? Where you would wake up in the morning, you would drive to the office, or you would finish work at the office and you would clock out and you would drive home. The Office was also a mid-2000s TV show that should have never continued without Michael Scott. You know what I mean? Never. It was just bad from there on. But The Office is like this physical place that you would go to, but now The Office follows you around in your pocket. I mean, think about it. We have access to email like right now. Spreadsheets live in the cloud. And theoretically, your boss could get in touch with you at any moment. This is a whole new world that we're finding ourselves in. Recently, I taught a class to parents on how to parent well in the 21st century, especially when your students have iPhones, if they're addicted to Instagram or Fortnite or whatever their thing is. And I was getting into this research and I thought that I would find that this is just a generational problem. That teenagers are the ones that struggle with like being addicted to technology and they're growing up in it and all this stuff. But parents would be like this whole other class of like, we don't struggle with this, we know limits. But what I've found is that the numbers are the exact same for teenagers and for the average adult. So 75% of teenagers and adults report to being online several times throughout the day. That's between 15 to 20 times checking their phone or being online. Now, an even more frightening statistic is that 25%, 1 in 4 of us, report to being online constantly. So look around, see the 4 people around you? One of them has a problem, okay? I'm not sure which one, but one of them does. And we have a prayer room that we'd love to pray with you if that's you. Really though, like we would love to. And this is the world that we live in. Adults check their phone on average 80 times a day, and interacting with their phone, touching their screen, 2,600 times a day on average. Now, if you're in the top 10th percentile of cell phone use in our country, you touch your phone 5,400 times a day. This is wild. This device in our pocket is changing us. And right now, there are links, scientific links between the use of technology and people that are stressed, have low level or like high levels of fatigue and depression. Do you ever feel like we're going backwards? I found this really helpful chart that kind of like captures this cultural moment that we're in. I want to share this with all of you. I feel like that monkey so often, right? If you're young Earth or old Earth, that's funny right there. But we don't, you could take that down. The problem is we don't know how to power down. And it's changing us. We don't know how to actually take a rest, how to get a deep breath like we talked about last week to actually be refreshed. And maybe we get a day off. If you're lucky, we get a day off. But you fill that day off with just chores and errands and things that you couldn't get done throughout the week, and you're running kids around from like activity to activity. You have to get your car and your oil changed, and you have to go shopping and do all of these things. And if we do get a moment to ourselves in that day off, we usually fill it with scrolling and like figuring out what our kind of friends from high school are doing with their life, you know? And we find ourselves deep in video holes of watching like cat videos over and over and over and over. And they're funny, but so many cats on the internet. It's insane. And maybe we'll fill our time with watching Netflix and binging the next series on Netflix. Do you remember when the word binge used to be like a bad thing? Now it's like the thing. It's like I binged through that whole show, and you're like, oh, that doesn't sound like that restful or that helpful to your life. Are we just destined to live like this? Is this the world that we live in, and we just got to hop on the treadmill and just try to keep up with this American pace of life, this Portland pace of life? So then when we come into a conversation about following Jesus and anything to do with our relationship with him, we see it as like just another thing to add to an already full plate. Like, Keithan, I get it. I would love time to restore my soul, but like, I'm a little bit busy. Like, I don't have any space for this. But the story of the scriptures actually is an invitation into something totally different. What if I were to tell you that being in the scriptures and allowing God to restore our soul, it comes not with an expectation that you would do more, but actually an invitation to do less. Psalm 23 invites us into a whole new way to be a human being that I'm personally continually learning and being shaped by. And I would love to invite you in to that space today. So the beginning of this psalm, I think, has some really awesome insight for us when it comes to how do we become restored? How do we get your soul to a place of health? So we're gonna walk line by line through this. If you guys could look down at that first line with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It all begins with intimacy with God and intimacy with the Holy Spirit. And if you're in that place, what's going to happen is that you'll find that all of your needs are being met. Another translation, instead of I shall not want, is I lack nothing. It begins with intimacy with God. Move to the second line with me. He makes me lie down in green pastures. This picture was helpful last week of that Hebrew word nachal, which means to lead gently but firmly by the hand. Where God, as the picture of our shepherd, will take us, the sheep, and make us to lie down. And getting in this physical posture of rest. The next line, he leads me beside still waters. The thing about sheep is that sheep don't like to drink from rushing rivers and streams where there's like a lot of chaos happening. The water has to be calm. So here in this space, as God is our shepherd, he's giving us physical rest. And he's giving us physical renewal in the way that water, after you go on a long run or you're playing basketball for hours and you take a drink of water, it's like refreshing, like physically to your soul. That's the kind of thing that God wants to do for you. The next line, he restores my soul. That's what we've been talking about these past weeks, healing deep wounds and reviving your spirit. And last, he leads me in paths of righteousness. So when we talk paths of righteousness, I think right to character development. And our culture gets this. Often what we want to do is have our character shifted. Like we have this sense, like I want to be a better person. I want to grow. I want to become better. So that's why self-help books are like the most bought at Powell's. And we spend all this time trying to search out paths of righteousness. Now, paths of righteousness aren't bad in and of themselves. The longer that we walk with God, we're able to see more clearly what is light, what is darkness, what is good, what is bad, what is helpful, what is hurtful. But I think we get this thing flipped on its head. God's invitation for us is intimacy with him, physical rest and renewal, healing of your soul, and character development. And what we've done, I think, in America is we've flipped this thing on its head because we want the character development first without intimacy with God, rest, and healing of deep wounds in our soul. And no wonder we feel tired because our souls aren't at rest in the presence of a God that loves us. And this passage is usually read in the context of death, like maybe someday we'll lay down beside, streams of water and we'll lay down in green pasture. Someday, when we die and we go to be with God, that's what we'll do. But this is actually an invitation for you and for me now. That the kingdom of heaven is this now and not yet reality. Where like in Jesus, when he came, he paid for the sin of the world. He's invited us into life with him. And one day he will be the king over all creation. But we live in the tension in between. Rest is very similar. We have that rest, yes, eternal rest with God someday, absolutely. But this rest is a present reality that God is inviting us to step into. But don't just take my word for it. This concept of rest is all over the Bible, and we're going to get into a couple different sections of it. So if everyone could grab your Bibles and turn to Genesis chapter 2 with me. Genesis chapter 2. In the beginning, God creates all that we know, the heavens and the earth. But he does that in 6 days. And on the seventh day, he rested. Look down at verse 1 in Genesis chapter 2 with me. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all the work he'd done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all the work that he'd done in creation. So like a rhythm built into the fabric of the universe, work and rest were always meant to coexist in relationship with one another. Human beings made in the image of God, we are hardwired to need rest. None of us are a machine. And this last week, I got in touch with this guy that I would say he is a machine. He does CrossFit. Does anyone do CrossFit in here? No? See, because they're all working out, right? They're not in church. But I have this buddy who is a CrossFitter, and he's incredible. He actually was a part of Westside. His name is Mitch Stevenson. And we went to school together at George Fox, really cool guy, but he's a machine. Like, he's got abs for days, and he's got like big muscles, and he's like the total package. So he actually moved from Westside to go up to Bellingham, Washington, just to train to see if he could make it to the CrossFit Games. And this last week, he actually qualified to go to the CrossFit Games. He's one of the top 100 CrossFitters in the world, which is like pretty nuts. But I was asking him, okay, Mitch, to be at the level of athletics that you're at, you probably don't get a day off, do you? Like, what does your schedule look like? You must have to be in the gym every single day. And what he told me is that there is one day that his trainer says that he can't lift a single weight. There's another day in the week that he only does like some flexibility stuff and running. So even the top of the top, the most strong, best athletes are hardwired to need rest. If he were to keep up at the pace of lifting that he does on his heavy lifting days, just 7 days a week, his body would literally fall apart. It wouldn't have time to recover. And you might be here and say, well, I don't have big muscles, but I have coffee. And I'm a Portlander, so I don't need rest. I have Stumptown, right? A couple weeks ago, I was on this spring break trip, and I had a little sixth grader, this guy, come up to me, and he's like tugging on my pant leg, and he's like, "Hey, Keithan, I know it's like almost bedtime, but like I don't need to go to sleep because I brought a bunch of Red Bull." So I was like, no. So we're not going to do that. So I took the Red Bull, sent him to bed. But we all have this limited capacity to work. Even the strongest caffeine rush can turn into a caffeine crash really quickly. And often if we don't choose to rest will be forced upon us. Think about people in your life that just work like a dog and make it to the weekend just exhausted, just done. Think about people that are, we use that word burn out as a regular vocabulary for talking about the worker in America. People that are at the end of their rope constantly. Either we choose rest in rhythms, or rest will be forced upon us when we just can't go anymore. One thing I'd love to point out in Genesis chapter 2 is this word holy. This word holy in Hebrew is kadosh, and it means set apart or holy. Now, the first time that this word is used in the scriptures, it's not about a temple. It's not about a mountain. It's not about a throne. It's about time. It's about a day in the week. God says the seventh day is holy. There is a holiness to rest, a holiness to understanding your limits as a human being. The next time that we see Sabbath and rest is in Exodus chapter 20. And this is when God has rescued the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, and they're out in the wilderness. For 400 years, longer than the United States has existed as a country, for 400 years, these slaves lived building bricks for the Egyptians. That was their only thing. They would wake up in the morning, build bricks, go to sleep, wake up, build bricks over and over and over. And God brings them out into the wilderness, and he's teaching them a brand new way to be human. He gives them the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments, like that language is just kind of like a little bit misunderstood in my opinion. Like, commandments isn't the best translation. In Hebrew, it's just the 10 things. The davar is the word in Hebrew, just the 10 things that God wanted to say to his people. Basically, if you can do these 10 things, Like, you're going to live a flourishing and healthy life with me. But in the 10 commandments and the 10 things God is trying to say to recreate these people, the biggest commandment, the one with the most real estate, is about rest. Let that sink in. It's about rest and Sabbath. Let's check out this verse in Exodus chapter 20. It says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor, do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, your son or daughter, male or female servants, or your animals. Even the animals get a break. Or any foreigner residing in your town. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is within them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. There again, we see that same word, kadosh, being set apart, having a rhythm to the world around you. Rest. Receiving that. There was a saying where I grew up in Wyoming, which you might think Wyoming's kind of lame, but Kanye did an album release from Wyoming this week, so I'm feeling pretty good about being from Wyoming. And in Wyoming, there's a saying, you can take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the girl. Okay, a bunch of blank stares are looking back at me. What does that mean? Well, it would be like if I graduated with a girl from high school and she moves to New York to like chase her dreams or whatever, and she would still be taking pictures of her in Times Square in cowgirl boots, right? Or still wearing Carhartt. It's hard to take the country out of the girl. And I think that's exactly what's happening here in Exodus 20. God has brought the Israelites out of Egypt, but he's having a harder time getting the Egypt out of people. And I think for us, God is asking us, he's like, we got to get some of that American pace of life, that Portlander pace of life out of your mind. We've got to get you into a whole new space that you are human beings, not human doings. That your value is not contingent on your production. Your value comes from who you belong to. And that's so weird. That does not sound like the world that we live in today at all. But that's what God says about us, and that's what he invites us into, this day of Sabbath. I love this quote from Mark Buchanan in this book that we recommended earlier. It says that Sabbath is that one day. It's a reprieve from what you ought to do, even though the list of oughts is infinitely long and never done. Oughts are tyrants, noisy and surly, chronically dissatisfied. Sabbath is the day you trade places with them. They go into the salt mine, you go out dancing. It's the one day when the only thing you must do is to not do the things you must. You were given permission, issued a command to be blunt, to turn your back on all those oughts. You get to willfully ignore the many demanding things your existence genuinely depends on and is often hobbled beneath, so that you can turn to whatever you put off and pushed away for lack of time, lack of room, lack of breath. You get to shuck the have-tos and lay hold of the get-tos. That's what God is inviting us into. And if you look to the New Testament, you see this word Sabbath in the Gospels all the time, and most of the time, it's the day of the week that Jesus got himself in the most trouble. And why is that? It's because Jesus chose to heal on the Sabbath. Because that's what the Sabbath is for, right? Resting, renewal, healing. But the religious elite in Second Temple Judaism, kind of the world that Jesus grew up in, they built all of these rules, like hundreds of extra rules on top of the Sabbath, saying, okay, we better not like mess those up because God is going to be so angry at us if we mess up. They kind of forget that intimacy piece. But then Jesus steps on the scene in Mark chapter 2 with this incredible line that the Sabbath, or that man does not exist for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man. And Jesus drops the mic, right? It's this incredible moment. Essentially, Jesus is saying, This was always supposed to be a gift, a way of life in a chaotic world. Don't focus on the rules of it. Just receive the gift. And this is one of those moments where I believe that the rubber meets the road in our apprenticeship to Jesus, where if we're going to truly be his disciples, we need to slow our pace of life to his. We need to receive this gift of rest that he's trying to give us. The Sabbath and rest were staple parts of Jesus' life, and I would love for us as Westside to step into that as well. Many of us, myself included, we love visiting the presence of God. Whether we come to church or we listen to Bethel or Hillsong on our commute and we just get our Jesus time in, right? We love to visit the presence of God. But this was super convicting for me this week. Very few of us will actually shift around things in our life to live in the presence of God. 24/7, like the Garden of Eden. That's the life that's possible for you. I think instead, we're like marathon runners grabbing a glass of water or like those little foam cup things as we're running, and we just grab it, splash a little water into our mouth, throw the cup down, and continue to run hard at the direction that we've set for ourselves. When God would love to help us to stop and to take a drink from the water of life. So what would this look like to actually lay down and to receive his renewal? Well, before we talk through some specifics about what this could look like for you, I just have 3 disclaimers in this conversation of Sabbath, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts, if that's all right with all of you. All right, so the first disclaimer is that this practice will look different for you based on 2 things. First is your personality, and second is your season of life. So I am an extremely extroverted 25-year-old guy who's been married for like 3 years, and I look after a group of youth leaders and a bunch of students, okay? That's kind of my season of life. Now, my wife, she kind of leans a little bit more introverted, but she still loves people, which is good. And she has been studying to become a nurse for the past 2 years. And next weekend, she's going to graduate from nursing school, which we're super excited about. So our season of life has looked like loving young people and leaders and doing a lot of homework, right? But for you, you might be a single mom or single dad in here, and your season of life and personality might be completely opposite of mine. You might be an empty nester or a college student or a mom or dad with young kids and a new career. But in this conversation, we're inviting you to find what works for you, but to seek it out. Find how you can incorporate rhythms of rest into your soul wherever you're at along this journey. No one is disqualified from this. The second disclaimer is that the Sabbath or true rest is different from simply just getting a day off. On a day off, you're still running errands and cleaning the house and running kids from this thing to that thing. But on the Sabbath, you are simply present. You cease to work and enjoy your friends and your family. And the last disclaimer is there is a difference between rest and leisure. And I think our culture gets leisure, like, yeah, we just do things we enjoy and we like entertain ourselves on our day off. But true rest isn't trying to distract ourselves from the world, but actually trying to find a rhythm of peace within the world itself. And that itself is worship to God. Okay, so we're going to get into some nuts and bolts. I just have 4 things that as you step out and as you think about healing your soul this week, these can hopefully help you give some direction to what this could look like. So the first thing is resting from technology. Resting from technology. If you're a young person in here, I just saw your stomach drop. But resting from technology is huge and has been central in my discipleship to Jesus. And what this can look like is at the beginning of my Sabbath, I will turn off my phone, and that's such a good feeling. And it goes away for a while, and then I'm able to be present with my wife. I'm able to be there with her and enjoy the gifts that God has given us. And about halfway through the day, I'll grab my phone and I'll turn it back on because I live about 1,000 miles away from my family. And something that's really restful for me is having a conversation with my dad, having a conversation with my mom, having a conversation with my 13-year-old brother that lives in Wyoming that I love. But then I take, after that conversation is done, I'll turn my phone back off and continue to rest from it. So we don't need to be afraid of technology. It's not the problem, but resting from it in an age where we're just oversaturated with likes and blips and comments, that's a huge gift. So whatever this looks like for you, it could be just realizing that your phone actually turns off. If you push that little button on the side of your phone, you hold it down and then you swipe the thing, it goes to sleep. It's amazing. But it could just start with a morning without your phone. And like a morning into afternoon. It could look like a whole day. Just start small and go for this. It will be life to you. I guarantee it. The second thing is a question that can really frame your time. What fills you with overflowing joy? I think in my life, I often live by logistic questions. Is this going to help me get from point A to point B? Is this reasonable? Do I have time for this? Rather than asking, if I had a day to do whatever I could that would fill me with life, what would that be? And then going for it, doing those things. So for me, I experience the presence of God more on a chairlift at Timberline almost than anywhere else in the world. And I love snowboarding and being outside, the adrenaline of it, just being connected in nature. It's a way that I refuel. So ask yourself that question. You guys know Brooke Mosier? He's kind of the Jason Statham looking guy that comes in and does announcements every now and then. Yeah, he's a cool dude, but I want to be him someday, really. But he gave me this question that I think is really helpful, especially for those of you who maybe have small kids or are in a really busy season of life that you're not really sure what this looks like. Ask yourself this question. On the Sabbath, on the day that you set aside for rest and worship with God, is whatever we're doing worshipful rest and fun? And that can look like taking your kids on a walk to the park. It could look like getting some space, telling stories, cooking long meals. This is one that my wife and I love to do, is just cook together and invite people over, friends and family. So refueling for you might not look like just a Bible with coffee and a cabin in the woods like Dom. That's his thing. I love Dom, don't tell him I said that, but that's his thing to recharge. For some of you, it could look really different, and that's okay. Just receive the way that God has wired you. And the third thing is that rest is a discipline. This is a discipline, but when you put these rhythms into your life, it will change you. What if we started to look at our schedule as a place of worship? What if we started to step into our agenda for the week like we do stepping into church on Sunday, allowing Him to form and guide every decision that we make? This is a discipline, but it will change your life. The fourth thing is start small and have grace for yourself. It's okay. We live in a world that is going at an incredible pace. So if this takes time to get good at this, that's okay. Start small. Start with taking moments of intimacy with you and God in the middle of your hectic week. We're kind of fighting an uphill battle here. You won't have a lot of people in your life that are learning how to Sabbath well and how to rest well, and that's okay. But if you embrace this, man, it will heal parts of you that you didn't even know were broken. Now, hear me here. This American Portland pace of life is not the pace of Jesus. It's just not. But when you look at who Jesus is, go to Mark chapter 1. These are the first words historically ever written about Jesus, and watch how he does life. He withdraws to pray in those intimate moments with his Father. He was present with the people around him. He was never busy. Yeah, he had a mission. He had a lot of stuff to do, but he was never busy. He was with the people in his life. Hebrews chapter 4 points to us to Jesus not only as like our model of rest, but Jesus himself and our relationship with him is our rest. When we can know that our sins are forgiven and we can rest in his presence, it's a really, really good feeling. All of the striving is done. But this rest is going to take sacrifice. And paradoxically, resting can be really difficult. In Hebrews chapter 4, verse 11, it says this really confusing line, let us strive to enter that rest. And you're like, what? That's not helpful, right? How do you strive to enter rest? And I never really understood this until last weekend, honestly. And last weekend, I was out on the upper Clackamas River learning how to be a whitewater rafting guide. So so that's me on the back of the boat here. I'm covering my face, so you're gonna have to take my word for it, but that is actually me. And there's my buddy Tom right next to me, and we're trying to learn how to do whitewater rafting as like a ministry. Like we want to take young people out and teach them about Jesus on a boat, which would be super fun. But one part of this training was really interesting and brought all of this to light for me. And it was moving from the current, like this rushing current with rapids and all this stuff, into what are called eddies. And eddies are part of the river that are calm. And they're like these still parts. While everything is continuing to rush around it, it's still. So our part of training in this is how do we get from the current into the eddy? And it is hard work. You have to angle this boat just right. You have to get all the people rowing with all their strength to get fighting upstream enough that you can turn it and you can find that place of rest in what are called eddies. But when you do this, it is the most trippy, incredible feeling ever because you can be sitting in the middle of the Deschutes or the Clackamas, this rushing river all around you, and you can sit completely still. It is the most amazing feeling ever, and I think that that's what the writer of Hebrews is talking about. It's gonna take some work. But once you work, once you like fight upstream, you can enter that rest. We strive to enter the rest of Jesus because he offers it to us. I have this quote from Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's an incredible Jewish scholar, but he writes on the Sabbath, and I think that this is like a really beautiful way to end here. He says that Shabbat or Sabbath comes with its own holiness. We enter not simply a day, but an atmosphere. Strict adherence to the laws regulating Sabbath observance doesn't suffice. The goal is creating the Sabbath as a foretaste of paradise. Unless one learns how to relish the taste of Sabbath, one will be unable to enjoy the taste of eternity in the world to come. It was on the seventh day that God gave the world a soul. And the world's survival depends on the holiness of the seventh day. The task, he writes, becomes how to convert time into eternity, how to fill our time with spirit. 6 days a week, we wrestle with the world, wringing profit from the earth. And on the Sabbath, we especially care for the seed of eternity planted in the soul. The world has our hands, but our soul belongs to someone else. That's so good. And what would this look like? I think that this would look like fathers being present with their sons and daughters. Mothers more interested in building character in their sons and daughters than seeking attention through screens. It looks like college students not finding their identity in their grade point average, but in their identity as sons and daughters of God. This looks like a generation more addicted to the presence of the Holy Spirit than likes on Instagram. This looks like men and women in the workplace all over this city, OHSU and Nike and Intel and Lionheart or wherever you work, able to go hard at what God's given you, but knowing when to step away, when to breathe, and when to rest. So our prayer at Westside is that we would become a people marked by rest, that we would worship Jesus not just with our words and our songs, but with our calendars, and that we would learn to become a people that receive the gift of limits and submit to the easy yoke of Jesus. And his question to you this morning is simple. Will you receive the gift?